Good day to you and welcome to Reset 2020. This is our 9th live show and it's great to have you here today with us. You might be here live with us or you might be watching this as a recording. It's great to have you here either way. My name is Julia Keedy. I am your host today. I'm also the founder and CEO of the X Factor Collective community. I'd like to introduce also here on screen with me, my co-host today, Jodie Wilmar. Jodie Wilmar is a governance specialist and also a foundation member of the X Factor Collective. And Jodie is also known for her podcast series, The Insightful Director. Welcome, Jodie.
Thanks, Julie. It's great to be here. Super excited.
Great to have you here. Before we begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gamalarawa people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording from here today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us here today. Today, we are very excited to kick off part 1 of a series of 4 live shows over the coming 6 to 8 weeks, all around organisational reshaping. Today's topic is making the tough strategic choices. We're all in that boat a little bit at the moment, whether we're downsizing or upsizing within our organisations, and we're really excited about the great talent and speakers that we're organising for you for the coming weeks. Today's program is all part of Reset 2020, research study and national live programming, designed to help extend support and advice to as many organisations as possible during this most unusual time. Reset 2020 sits within our programming area at the X Factor Collective. And the Reset 2020 live shows are made possible and free thanks to our partnership with Equity Trustees. If this is your first experience with Reset 2020 and the collective, welcome. It's lovely to meet you. The X Factor Collective is a community where social change makers can access support and advice from a trusted and experienced community of providers. Our mission is to improve wellbeing and hopefully reduce burnout in change makers by enabling change to happen in a much more collaborative way. Before we get started here today, a couple of housekeeping notes. We are using Zoom platform today. In the chat box, we'll soon place some phone links. If your link drops out, you can jump back in via the phone. You may have also received those phone links in your email confirmation. We'll also put in the chat box some relevant links for you throughout the session today. Today's format, we will be hearing from our speakers first and then have time for you to ask your questions and for you to hear from Jane and Julia as well. Please lodge your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. That makes it much easier for Jodie to be able to facilitate the questions throughout the next hour. As mentioned, we are recording the session today and all recordings will be made back available at our Reset 2020 resource hub. So now I am going to leave you in Jodie's capable hands, bring on Jane and Julia to the show, and I will see you later in the show.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that gorgeous warm welcome, and welcome everybody to Reset 2020. I'm Jodie Wilmar and I'm really delighted to be with you today. I'd like to also welcome and introduce our guest speakers today. I'd like to introduce Jane Smith, who is an organisational specialist and strategist and a member of the X Factor Collective. Welcome, Jane. I'd also like to welcome and introduce Jane Cabbage, who's the CEO of the Australian Institute of Architects. Today we're going to turn our attention to ways to reshape our organisations and transform during periods of rapid change, and particularly focusing on transforming and prioritising strategic projects in these unusual times. Jane Smith is a communications, governance and leadership and strategy specialist, and she describes herself as a change agent and she strengthens capability and manages disruption, innovation and sustainability. There's certainly a lot of that going on at the moment. And she's currently working on some really exciting projects with the Australian Institute of Architects. We're also joined by Julia, who has over 20 years experience as a CEO and recently joined Australia's peak body for architecture, the Australian Institute of Architects, to lead a national membership organisation during an exciting era of transformation. So welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jodie. Thanks,
Thank you
Jodie.
so
Thanks for
much.
having us.
Pleasure. It's great to see you here today, and thank you for making the time to share your experiences and knowledge. We might start off perhaps with Julia to kick off. And for the people who are here in the audience today, they might not be familiar with AIA's role. Would you mind giving us a little bit of a brief overview?
Certainly. The Australian Institute of Architects is a 90-year-old peak body working with architects, the profession of architecture, to actually advance the cause and the profession, and to actually support our members, of which, we've got some 12,500. I think that our role is certainly one around policy and advocacy, communications, education, continuing education, and ultimately ensuring that the community is actually well cared for when we talk about design. So that's, in a nutshell, what the Australian Institute of Architects works on.
Terrific, thank you. That's a great overview. And so you're fairly new into your role as CEO with AIA. What are some of your observations about the organisation when you first commenced?
I've been with the organisation now 18 months, so I can't call myself a newbie at all by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that my observations of the organisation are that it's tried very hard in difficult circumstances over a number of years to actually be able to support the needs of the membership. And they've done a really admirable job, kind of looking at it as more a club kind of approach, supporting the members, providing that peer-to-peer engagement, but actually missing a critical piece, which was the policy advocacy piece and the voice to government representing the profession. They've always been great at providing continuing professional development, being able to engage the membership at a coalface, but not really being able to advance the needs of the community. So I think that the piece that was missing for me was all around policy and advocacy. Lots of volunteers working incredibly hard, but not getting a great amount of bang for their buck. So looking at how my first projects were all around how do we actually reduce the busy work and create stronger outcomes for a profession that is essential for great community outcomes.
Yeah, I think you've actually helped me understand and appreciate a bit more about the role of architects when you think about all of the things that we depend on it for, the built environment, community hubs. I mean, there's so many different elements to it for access and inclusion. So we might bring Jane into this conversation too. So Jane, your expertise is working with organisations during transformation and innovation. We're all experiencing quite a lot of it at the moment with COVID-19. What are some of the things that you have learnt from joining the organisation and working on these strategic projects?
Well, I think the reform roadmap that Julia started with in February last year actually allowed the organisation to get itself ready for what became the circumstances this year under the pandemic. So, Julia and I had a very early discussion, for example, about putting Zoom in place. And we got everyone kind of Zoom literate so that when the pandemic happened, people were able to very readily switch to working from home. As Julia said, there was a range of really kind of big issues that were being dealt with. For example, I'm just finishing with Julia a 13-month exercise to revise the constitution of the Institute. So there's been a range of those kind of fundamentals. When I started with Julia in her second week as CEO, and we did some strategic planning, and a lot of those issues are the things that we've been working on. And she wanted me to sort of provide a fresh set of eyes over some things that had already been in train before she arrived.
Fantastic. And Julia, you've mentioned before about the great work that has been done over many years by many people within your organisation and volunteers. What's changed now to strengthen the advocacy and the policy voice?
Well, I think this has been a 6-year journey. You know, around 2014, they moved from an organisation that was actually being managed by a national council, which is a fairly outmoded way of running a professional organisation. So they had seen that they and understood that they needed to move through a change cycle. And so they actually professionalised and basically brought in a board of directors. So that was the first stage. They rewrote a constitution, which we're now revising, because it's actually not fit for purpose in our current environment. So tweaks rather than massive change, but tweaks are just as complex as massive change. And so bringing 12,500 people on that journey has been really critical. But Jane has done an amazing job with that. So what I call it is change fatigue. So around about 2016, 17, people were kind of overwhelmed by all of the change that had occurred within the organisation and kind of started to push back. And so it slowed and then it cycled back to where it had been. So unless you are relentless with change, people will go back to previous behaviours. So what we've done over the last 18 months, and we had around 160 committees across the country, all working valiantly to try and produce outcomes for the profession. What we've done is we've pared that all back to critical pieces that actually start to demonstrate what we stand for and what our values are. So moving from a very peer-to-peer based organisation to a values-led organisation that can actually be positioned to drive change. And I think that, as Jane said, given that we've moved to a much stronger digital platform of delivery, not only for communications, but also for delivery of things like CPD and events, it had enabled us to actually be fit for purpose when COVID occurred. And so, you know, we were ready. We basically talked about, you know, over the month of March, where we're going to be. We were already rostering people in and out of offices. And then when they said, you know, it's shut down, we basically all walked out of an office somewhere around the country and started to work from home. And everybody was equipped, capable and ready. And we were also then able to bring the membership along on that journey as well, because that's what we had been teaching them to do for probably 9 months before it happened.
Wow, that's an amazing achievement. So it sounds from what you're both saying is that, in fact, there were sort of two different levels of change going on. There's sort of longer term strategic change, which is that constitutional piece, and the 160 committees, what did you say?
There's always a long and a short game, Jodie.
Jodie, if you want to put up that slide, there's actually a couple of slides that at least visually show the complexity of what Julia was dealing with.
Absolutely. So I'll pop that now on the screen and show you here. So this is the one you wanted, Jane?
Yes. So
talk us through this to help us understand this a little bit.
So this is each state, basically. So these are actually, you know, the orange is the lines going down are each of the states that we have an office in, and that will indicate to you how each of them had this number of committees that they were operating. And when you combine 160 committees with, and a national bench of committees as well, with 60 odd staff, you can understand that trying to take the information and the good work that comes out of those committees and then turn it into something meaningful becomes really complex and difficult. So in fact, we were an organisation servicing ourselves, and that has a limited lifespan. And you know, the work that was coming out of those committees was phenomenal, but we actually had no capacity to actually turn it into anything. So as a peak body, we also didn't have a senior team leader in policy and advocacy. So one of the first things I actually did was elevate and place into our executive team a lead for policy and advocacy, which was a turning point as well.
Fantastic. And Jane, when you started working with AIA and started embarking on this journey of change, where do you start with something like this? I mean, this just seems so overwhelming and complex, and albeit, you know, great work and expertise within the chapters and within those working groups. So where do you start with that?
Well, you know, Julia asked me to do some strategic planning work with her senior team and then with the board and National Council. And I guess my approach is always to get people to think about, what does success look like? Because I think that's a really important way to frame how you can move forward, rather than, you know, because I think sometimes a SWOT analysis just takes you down a spiral of how many things you've got to grapple with that don't work. So we did that, and there'd been an interim CEO prior to Julia, and she had done a report that got endorsed, you know, to give us these kind of key issues that we had to deal with. And once Julia asked me to come into the team, so I effectively have become a member of the executive team. And we started these weekly, you know, work in progress meetings, and we started off with 36 projects that we were trying to juggle. And we're now down to about 8, which includes COVID. So the model for me, you know, I've worked for cabinet ministers, and I treated myself like a chief of staff to Julia as the cabinet minister. So she could sort of tell us what she wanted, and then I'd work with the team to make sure that we kind of got there. And obviously at times I'd have to escalate things back to Julia to get advice. But that's how we kind of worked our way through building a trust team and managing all those interconnecting and complex issues.
Mm. And I would just add to that, and Jane has been absolutely amazing, and, you know, and is an absolute set and forget, because once we actually designed the strategy around what we were going to deliver and how we could deliver it, given, you know, we have finite resources like everyone else, and quite a large digital transformation piece going on, and then how did we fit the people to be able to actually deliver? How could we identify who was internal that could actually relate to those sort of things? Without Jane being able to actually bring some of that together, I wouldn't have been able to push through on a number of the projects that I was working on. And Jane would probably confirm that I'm a nudger. I nudge people as I see them moving. I nudge them towards the goal rather than tell them where the goal is, and help them to understand how they can get there as well, and feel gratified that they've actually achieved and that they're purposeful in an organisation as well, which is really important to me. I'm a very values-led leader, quite emotionally intelligent, engaged with my teams all across the organisation. So it was important that, given we've got a disparate workforce in everywhere from Darwin to Western Australia and Tassie and all over the country, and members who are in far-flung places, being able to provide a platform that they were all capable and able to engage with and feel supported and encouraged is really important to me. And so Jane, having Jane do what she was doing, enabled me to do those sorts of activities as well. And it doesn't matter if you've got one staff member or 450 or 30. Those are really important pieces of work to do, because if you haven't got a team that's engaged, as I said, whether it's 1 or 10 or 100, you won't ever achieve your goals.
I really love the way you describe that as nudging. So can you give us a practical example of what a nudge looks like from a values-led perspective? I'm looking for some tips here, and I'm sure that there's some people here joining us in the audience who are thinking,
you might see nudging more than I do. I'm not sure how it pans out.
Look, I think Julia's leadership style, and there is a whole sort of psychology around nudging, which can be manipulation. That's not how I see Julia's nudging. Julia's leadership style is very much about authentic, open communication, talking about strategic directions, problem solving collectively when we need to, and her being prepared to make a decision when she needs to. And I think, you know, I talked about building up a trust. You know, the organisation previously, and I think I can say this publicly, Julia, had a large number of staff that had stayed for 2 years or less. So the stability of the organisation became a really important issue, and Julia has done that, and she's built up these great trust relationships. And again, that set the organisation up really well to handle a pandemic, because you'd actually built up, it was authentic communication, it was compassionate, there was a loyalty to staff and members, you know, it was clear and so on. And that's, I think, why Julia's done so well in these last difficult months.
And I also think, just building on the trust piece, is that trust isn't something that's given, it's something that's earned. And you only earn trust through demonstrating your values and performing. And I think that, you know, when we come back to relationships with board and national council, it's perfectly, I think, understandable that when you're a new CEO coming into a role, that people around you at a senior level who are directing you, who are your governance team, as in your board of directors or your national council or whoever they are, I don't think that you can come into that environment and just expect that they will trust you. Mm. You need to be able to demonstrate to them that you're trustworthy. And I think that in some instances, you see emerging CEOs and CEOs who are new probably may not necessarily understand that. And so when there's any kind of hurdle or pushback, they may respond poorly to that. But you really do need to demonstrate your value. Just because you have a title doesn't mean that you can do it. So you need to be able to demonstrate and be quite clear about what you will and won't do, what your value system is, and who and how you can actually live in that space. And I think that that's really important. And I know that when I came to the Australian Institute of Architects, it was on the back of a fairly tough couple of years where they'd had a number of CEOs through the organisation. And understandably, they were a little, probably best terminology, was a little gun shy about what to anticipate and what sort of skill level I would bring to the organisation. And it wasn't easy for the first 6 months to actually get an understanding and create, I guess, a vibe at a governance level that I actually knew what I was doing and that I could actually get this done. So, and I think that that's fair and reasonable. Hard, but reasonable.
Yeah, I think you're very right there, Julia. I think people do underestimate how important the relationship is between not just the CEO and the board or National Council, but that trust from members and staff that they won't be left behind, or that their significance or their knowledge or their expertise or the things that they're passionate about won't get lost in the shuffle when there's major changes underway.
Yeah.
And during COVID, the Institute has set up these twice weekly lean-ins, which are free for members, and they cover everything from, how do you start working from home through to well-being, through to quite technical issues. And there's been something like 12,000 members engaged across the 3 or so months of those lean-ins. So again, that's a consistent message about good communications, caring about the members, and thinking creatively about how to find solutions in a lockdown.
And we've also done that for our team as well. So each week we have virtual drinks on a Friday afternoon and trivia. We also have run lean-ins for staff all the way through as well. Everything from learning how to draw, as in illustration. Yeah. So not necessarily even work-related things that would help them to cope in the climate that they were living in and feel connected to the rest of their team, but also something fun and different. We provided things like membership to free online yoga, meditation, all sorts of things that we thought would help our teams around the country with resilience and being able to cope with isolation and etc. So all sorts of things like that. So little fun things that didn't cost the organisation a fortune, but also provided great benefit and indicated the fact that we were true to our values and that we actually care about our people.
Absolutely. And what I love about the way that you just both described that, Jane and Julia, is the lean-ins and then access to these, I guess, inspirational self-care, you know, fun things to do. A lot of that is low cost, no cost. It's really about saying, you know, what could we be doing to care for people and keep them engaged and connected in this time? So hopefully if you're here in the audience, you're coming away with some ideas. If you're not doing some of those things, maybe some things that you could apply in your own organisation at a very, you know, minimal cost that helps people stay connected and develop those relationships during times of disruption. I wanted to ask you both a little bit more about the role of the board during this time of rapid change, but also during COVID. I'll start with you first, Julia. Has there been any change in the way that you're engaging or reporting with the board at this stage?
We're meeting more frequently, but we're meeting more frequently across the organisation, I think at all levels. You know, we're actually engaging with our National Council on a monthly basis. We're having finance meetings. At the front end, it was fortnightly, and board meetings monthly, whereas we were generally every 2 months or so. So yes, there's been quite a lot of, it's been more intense. And ultimately, you know, we presented a range of, I guess very early on, we made some assumptions about what was actually happening in the marketplace and presented to the board a range of options around how we could support our members who were obviously experiencing difficulty due to COVID as well. We were lucky enough to be eligible for JobKeeper, so that's assisted us greatly. I mean, we've assessed our entire workforce, we've redeployed, we've aligned them, but we've done all of that in alignment with the board. So, for example, we made some representations to the board for what we believed could happen. They came back and we approved a rate cut for our membership, a reduction for 2 quarters for membership fees of 50%. So basically half a year at 50% for all of our members, to show that we are supporting them as well, and that we also understand the difficult situation that they find themselves in. So we're trying to support them as much as we can. We made a whole range of CPD events free of charge for them. We also had a situation where we were right in the middle of our awards program and we needed to go digital with that. And one of the real strengths of our awards program has always been, and what differentiates us from everyone else, is that every site pretty much that's shortlisted across the country in our awards program is actually physically visited by a jury. So, big step, no jury, can't have a jury. What happens next? So we were nimble enough for our South Australian chapter to be able to look at the program as it stood, because they were a little ahead of everyone else, redesign it and move to a virtual environment. So there were big things that we were doing. For example, we were meant to have been going to Venice for the Venice Architectural Biennale, and obviously that fell by the wayside, and it will be next year, and hopefully we'll be able to attend. But things like that needed to be cancelled. Our conference needed to be cancelled. These are all engagement pieces for a board of directors to actually make decision, and then consult with our National Council to actually let them know what our plans are and engage with them as well. So 2 levels of governance working there together. But yeah, absolutely. So a lot more meetings, but also I would say that our meetings have been amazing. And in the week prior to COVID being announced, we were all coming together for 3 days of strategic planning in Melbourne with National Council, our EDs from around the country, our executive directors from around the country, our executive and our board of directors all meeting in Melbourne for 3 days to basically do our strategic planning session. That would be, in my 18 months, that would be our third or fourth strategic planning session, looking at how we take the organisation forward, which actually turned into a really amazing day where we didn't fly in, where we actually had our very first ever Zoom strategic planning session with Linda Moore, who facilitated that, and it became our COVID plan. So we had 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and by the end of the day, we had facilitated a full page, a plan on a page, basically, of everything that we would do during the following year for COVID-19 and how we would represent the organisation. And I think that the outcome of that was just amazing. The way everyone came together to actually produce that piece of work was phenomenal. One of the strongest pieces of strategic planning I've ever seen. And we had a great outcome. So I would suggest that our relationships are even stronger due to COVID-19.
Wow, that's great to hear. Sorry to interrupt you there, Julia.
That's okay.
I'll come to you in a minute, Jane. I've got some other questions that I can't wait to ask you, but I'd love to hear from people who are here joining us today in the audience in today's live show. And we'd invite you to use the Q&A box, which is down at the bottom of the screen there, to type in your questions for throughout today's program. We're also going to launch a live poll, and that will be on your screen, and you're invited to click, it's anonymous, and you can click your response about and the question is, with your organisational strategy, what is your greatest challenge right now? That was a beautiful segue there with talking about turning the strategic plan into a COVID planning day on a page. So I'd love to hear from you. And this will be open throughout the whole of the live show today. And at the end, we'll hear those results. And we've got everybody voting furiously there. Quite a lot of people already feeling like they're treading water. And stuck in feeling of uncertainty. So keep responding. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and we invite you to include your thoughts in the questions and answers box below. So thank you. Now let's talk about a little bit more of the focus for now. So Jane, you mentioned starting off in today's live show about the 18-month project you've been working on sort of constitutional changes and structural things. And obviously there's been quite a journey of bringing people along and hearing their thoughts and making things more workable. Has COVID impacted your ability to sort of move forward on some of the key parts of this major project?
Look, it actually hasn't, Jodie. You know, I became the webinar queen for the Institute of Architects. I did 10 webinars on the Constitution, and I'd love to think they were sold out, but sadly no. But we had about 50 people yesterday because the AGM's next week. And again, I think the familiarity with using the technology has just put the Institute in such a good shape to keep having those conversations. And, you know, there's been a whole range of board and National Council meetings about key aspects of the Constitution. And so it's just moved forward because we were able to do all that communication via a platform. So really, and we're doing our first virtual AGM next week as well. So that hasn't actually made any difference.
Well, that's fantastic. I love that you describe yourself as the webinar queen. I think you need to update your LinkedIn profile with that one. But I think, you know, what we're really talking about here is it's not just embracing change and technology, but being open to doing things differently. We are, you know, generally speaking, people are trying to come together and communicate as best as possible, but doing it, you know, in fact, a lot of the organisations that I'm working with have said that by being able to do things remotely, especially with people who are geographically dispersed, doing things online via Zoom has actually had higher levels of engagement, and where people have felt that they really had a voice at the table and that they could make it a priority and they didn't have to travel and take half a day out in order to do that. So I think it's really enabled us to open our minds and hearts to thinking about how we could do things differently and better.
You know, and I think for a lot of people too, that it has enabled them to feel more like a team. And I think the old kind of command and control management structure where, you know, you'd have a boss who'd be checking up on you, you know, about when did you come in, what did you do? I think all of that's kind of gone really in this current environment. And, you know, it's about people's outputs, and, you know, there is, again, a trust there, and people can be part of a team.
Fantastic. Jane, could you expand a little bit more for us about maybe some of the things that haven't worked so well in some of the big strategic projects you've been working in? And what could we learn from that?
Well, Julia mentioned digital transformation, and this has been a very big, ambitious project for a number of years. And, you know, there's always a number of organisations who find themselves with legacy pieces of technology that they have to do something about. So, you know, the Institute was at the beginning when I arrived, simultaneously trying to change their membership structure, put in a new CRM, still be financially sustainable, and then think about how could you engage a younger cohort of members. So that was a big, ambitious set of things. And, you know, when Julia asked me to look at the proposals for the membership restructure, I could see that they would be very hard to implement with what we were trying to do with the technology. So I had to go to her and say, I don't think this is going to work in its current form. And she then got a new technology person in, and we've now been working through a very considered process, and we've also signed on to a member engagement platform. And it's taken longer, but I think the outcome will be better.
Fantastic. So you really, instead of trying to do a bajillion things all at once, simultaneously had that honest conversation to say, I don't think this is going to work, and being willing to sort of change your approach. One of the other things I'd like to ask you as well is, what have been some of the lessons for both of you, with Julia and Jane, about what surprised you at the moment about where things are at for you within your organisation, for you personally, during this period of time?
Julia, do you want to start? Oh, she's on mute.
We'll just ask Jane. Yep, unmuted now. Thank you. Go for it.
Okay. I think that this was about the learnings, isn't it? So I think for us, you know, we were very quick to recognise the pieces that weren't going to work in this structure and in the current plan, and be able to go to the board and say, this is really not going to work, and we need to think about it. Even though we know you've been working on it for 12 months, we need to address this, because otherwise it's really going to be a bit of a fiasco. And they were good enough to recognise that was what would happen, because we were able to present evidence-based information to them about why that wouldn't be the way we should go forward. But then we're able to extend that out. So rather than just saying, okay, this was the transformation project that was here, our transformation project is here. So we've actually gone a lot further than was ever imagined that project could go to, because we have a different vision for how the organisation can move forward. So I think that, you know, my lesson is always around good people, can-do, will-dos. If you surround yourself with can-do, will-do people, you can and will do anything. And you need to actually be aware that not everyone works in that space, and not everyone needs to, but you need to have a certain amount of people in your organisation that are flexible, that are agile. Overused word, I know.
I was going to call you out on that, actually.
But okay, we're playing bingo. But, you know, who are capable of pivoting and moving in a different direction, because otherwise that's what kills organisations, is the fact that you can't actually you have a team that can't change. You need to be able to address what's happening at a time and be across what's happening in the marketplace around you as well, and then respond to that.
So some great lessons there from you. What about you, Jane?
I guess, you know, if we're being kind of COVID specific, there's been a calmness about not doing the rushing around for me, which I've strangely enjoyed. And I think, and I have said this to Julia, so I suppose I can say it publicly, and not being in an open plan office. The productivity savings can be enormous.
Yeah, I think people won't go back to working in the way that they have in the past, and I don't think that they need to. I think that this will change the way we work. I've never been a time-based leader. I've always based my leadership and understanding and trust of people around their KPIs. Most people know if people aren't doing their jobs. I don't think you need to actually hold them to an account and say you've got to be there between 9 and 5 and expect that they will do more or better or different. I think you just need to actually harden up, develop some trust, and know that your people are actually good. And if they're not good, move them on.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's really moving from focusing on the hours as being the measures to being, you know, well, what are the key performance indicators? What are the outcomes, the results that people get? And if you can do it more quickly, why not?
Good for you.
Or in a different way, or you know what I've noticed as well, working with both clients and our own work ourselves, is that you're right, Jane. The sort of slower pace has enabled some deeper thinking about some problems or solutions, or you know, being more creative about things that haven't had the bandwidth to look at or think about. I'd love to ask the audience to pop your questions in the chat box. In the Q&A. We've got a couple there that we'll address in just a few moments. And if you haven't answered the live poll, please pop in your response. I'd like to just talk a little bit more before we go to the questions about the sort of changes you've made at a structural level with the Australian Institute of Architects. Jane, do you want me to show some more of those slides to just talk us through?
Yes, if you put that second slide up, which is the 2020 committee structure. Yes, this one. So, you know, Julia did a lot of work, and we had a 2-day strategic planning session in November last year with the Board and National Council, and got them to workshop what they saw as the key areas for committees, and very much an understanding that there would be some committees that were resourced and ongoing, and there would be a whole range of working groups that would have a finite life. So that's important. And then Jodie, if you want to put the next one up, which I might ask Julia to talk through, you know, and it was really important to conceptually explain the changes, and Julia was very good at doing that. So Julia, I might get you to just talk through that.
Sure. So this particular diagram or graphic indicates how we've moved away from the chaos of the 160 committees to actually have a clear structure that produced outcomes, policy in particular outcomes for the organisation. So everybody who came to our website, for example, could clearly see who we were, what we stood for, and what our values were. And I think that, you know, through this sort of structure, we're able to develop, you know, what we consider to be unambiguous lines of reporting, that there's clear accountability across the organisation, not just at a national level, but also at a state-based level, and also from our board, our national council, and all the way through the organisation. The accountability and responsibility becomes quite clear. And I don't think that anybody can have responsibility without having accountability. And I make that very clear, and it's very plain. And I think that, you know, this has actually assisted us to have people, so for example, if you're a national councillor, you will be engaged at a national committee as a sponsor, engaged in a specific topic area. It might be around our reconciliation action plan or around climate action, a range of different things. It might be around procurement, innovation, whatever that is, but you will be there. And then what also happens is from the state chapters, the people who are on those councils there feed up into those national committees as well. They come back, and so the reporting mechanism is cyclical. They go back, they report to their state about what's happening at a national level. National Council reports back to National Council on what's happening. And then all of the work of those committees comes out at the end and turns into a policy platform that feeds back into the organisation for review and renewal on a regular basis as well. So it means that we actually develop policy platforming that is actually informed and engaged at a grassroots level all the way through the organisation.
Fantastic. That's a great way to describe it. And I love a good visual that sort of helps make that so clear. I can see how you've got still the engagement and the buy-in from your members with their subject matter expertise, and then differentiating between a representative type model and then the governance structure there as well. Thank you so much for explaining that, Julia. So I'd like to open up for some questions now. And if you haven't pop them in the Q&A, you're welcome to do that now. And I'll just have a quick look at those and ask our delightful guests to answer them. Okay, so I'll start with one following on from governance. Jane, you mentioned about the special arrangements for an online AGM. Could you just talk us through a little bit of the logistics and how you're making that all work?
Well, this year's AGM is particularly important because we are voting on changing the Constitution. So, you know, we had a number of discussions about the appropriate way to do that. And we decided that getting an external company that had a track record in using the technology, worked for ASX companies for their AGMs, was the way to go. And you know, I guess we've done a different sort of notice of meeting so that, you know, people can work their way through the technology, and you know, people will still be able to submit proxies but then turn up online, and there's a whole because there's only a certain type of members that get to vote at the AGM. So there's a process that people go in and then they get a virtual voting card, and then they can vote in real time. And so it's been quite a process to get all of that technology right. And we're having a rehearsal early next week. So yes, hopefully it will go fine.
Yeah, fantastic. I have worked with some clients who use that sort of setup very well as a national organisation, and I think this is an area, and I'm pleased to hear that you've engaged some professionals who've got the technology that works already in a proven environment, say with ASX companies, because I guess from a transparency and accountability perspective, you know, you can't afford to get that wrong. That can erode trust very quickly, even with, you know, legitimate mistakes or unintended things that go wrong. So that I'm sure that'll run very smoothly for you. And so we have another great question here. So this relates to your strategy. So once you've pivoted your strategy for the short and medium term, what do you do not to lose sight of those long-term challenges posed by the need to change the business models in our sector?
You want me to start, Julia?
I don't mind, Jane. I'm happy to take it or whatever. I think that your short-term pivot piece shouldn't be so far removed from what your other direction should be. It's about dealing with, you know, the hectic environment in which you're living. And I think that I saw one of the questions on the poll that you're not quite sure where to go. I think that it allows you to actually address the needs of your constituents in the short term with the long-term goals still in the background. So for us, it was about engagement, communication, and, you know, policy. I mean, we're at roundtables with government, you know, all the way through this whole situation, and how we've actually been able to, I guess, represent our professionals in that space and make sure that we're advocating strongly for them. It's about determining the future of the profession as well. So ultimately, that's our long-term goal, 100%, but it just means how we've actually thrown our resources into pivoting quite strongly into that digital environment. And it's actually enabled our membership to have a stronger level of engagement right the way across the country. So we haven't changed our long-term goals, which we probably will, depending how long COVID goes for. You know, we've just moved to our national awards program to go to an online base. So that's a complete change of way we do things. But it's, I guess for us, it's more about some pieces of work you need to shine a light on and shine a light on fast and get it done. Other pieces you can leave in the background. So we just said, okay, what are the bits that we need to do urgently to ensure that our membership is supported and engaged and represented? And that was where our focus went immediately. We knew that we wouldn't be able to have face-to-face events, so we can just push those to one side, redeploy those staff into other areas because we didn't want to lose them, and then move on from there.
And that's enabled you to still continue to have the continuing professional development programs, the awards, you know, the other things that are a part of the benefits, and then obviously making those important decisions to reduce the membership fees as well in times of hardship.
Exactly. And accelerating projects. I mean, we've just launched our online learning management system, and you know, being able to actually build that, fill that, move on, it is a part of that process as well, that technological piece that we've been able to do. We've also been able to actually bring forward a number of those technology and digital pieces that we wouldn't have actually been able to do probably until next year or the year after. So it was probably, for the question, the person who asked the question, was more about advancing things that would actually support the membership now rather than actually a completely new strategy.
Yeah, and not losing sight of those longer term goals as well. Jane,
and your strategy should, sorry Jody, but your strategy is a moving feast anyway. It's not a document that's cast in stone. It should, if you are any kind of leader, you should be reviewing it, changing it, moving it, adjusting it on a 6 monthly basis anyway. So.
Absolutely. And if it's not working, throw it out and start again. Jane, what are your thoughts about that question?
Look, I think the days of being able to do 5-year strategic plans are gone. And, you know, as Julia was talking about, I think, you know, successful organisations now need to have, you know, processes and resources and people who can manage change, because that is the only constant. So, you know, and I think obviously we went, you know, we were about to do another 3-year plan which then became what we thought would be a 9-month plan to manage COVID, you know, and so really I think all of those things about making sure your organisation is resilient enough to manage these changes, because they're just going to keep coming in different forms. That's really the question now. You can't just go, oh, in, you know, 5 years' time we're going to be this. It won't happen like that.
You're right. Now, before I hand over to Julia, I'd just like to ask you both another quick question. You've both talked about the approaches you've taken to working with your members, with staff, board, and various councils. What are some things that you've just, you know, quick thoughts from you both about what you're doing to look after you at this point in time in terms of your well-being and health? Jane?
Well, as I'm out of Melbourne, so I'm not in lockdown, I've been going back to the gym, which I love. I've just enrolled for a Yale Wellbeing course, which they're trialling, because I thought, well, I was fascinated by how they're using the technology as much as anything else. And I also like a good book.
Awesome. Thank you. What about you, Julia?
Well, I'm also out of Melbourne, which is not, as in central Melbourne, but I am on the peninsula. So we are in lockdown, but I'm fortunate enough to live on acreage. I have a couple of great dogs. One that's a bit blind and a bit deaf, but the other one likes a walk. You know, basically that's about it for me. And as you can see in the background, I do a little collecting of wine. So I've spent a bit more time getting that full. And yeah, I think I'm probably not doing enough, but it's enough for me.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty. I think there's always things that we can be doing to look after ourselves, especially in leadership roles. So thank you both for sharing that, and thank you for this great conversation about the work you've been doing in this major changes within AIA and working with members. I'd like to hand over now to Julia, who will take us to the end of the program.
Thanks, Jodie.
Excellent. It's great to be sitting in the background here and just watching you all talking about change within a changing landscape. Absolutely loved it. Probably my key takeaway, and I'd love to hear what other people's key takeaway is, jump it into our chat box and let us know. But I really love, Julia, how you talked about can do and will do people can and will help you achieve anything. And, you know, it's that real positive attitude, isn't it, that we can all take regardless of what's thrown at us right now. So, yeah, something that I'm going to be taking back into the collective and talking about, you know, the community that we're building of can do and will do people. Loved that. Great facilitating. Thank you, Jodie Wilmar. That was just wonderful to sit back and watch you in action. The live poll that we ran, just to share the results of that, so you know, the runaway answer there was that we are feeling stuck by the uncertainty of it all. No surprises there. And the second one that came along there was we feel like we're treading water. That's something that's fairly common. And the third one there was we all have different views on what should be priority. So that might even be a session that we could organise at some stage with Reset 2020 around how do you actually build that collective buy-in on the right direction to take next. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on the live poll. Great to be able to see what's happening at this point in time so we can help to shape the future sessions. Talking of future sessions, we have more live shows for Reset 2020 coming, which is just fantastic. Thanks to our partners at Equity Trustees. We'll be back here with you over July and August. And as mentioned at the start of the show, if you weren't there, we are doing a bit of a small session at the moment, a small series looking at organisation reshaping. Our next session that we're running is around the topic of financial considerations in the new normal. This next session will be on Thursday, the 30th of July. So mark that down in your diaries. We will send out alerts as well. And please do let other people know. These sessions are free, and we've had such great feedback from people that have been able to access this whenever they want to and play back the recordings. At the next session, we will have both the CEO and the chair of a health organisation called Crohn's and Colitis Australia. Now, they've had to reshape their whole operating budget, and they're actually going to be taking us behind the scenes and under the hood of reshaping that budget. We'll also have one of our finance specialists from the collective, Brenton Cox. He's going to be there on the show as well with a couple of tools and tips to help organisations that might be going through some of that reshaping. We've also just confirmed yesterday that we're excited that the Jane Goodall Institute of Australia will be joining the show, our first show in August as well. We're going to be bringing on the CEO of Jane Goodall Institute with our change management specialists from the collective. We've got two change management specialists who are in lockdown together today, working out what they're going to be doing and presenting for you in August. So we're really excited about Jane Goodall Institute coming in August. As you've seen today, and if you've been with us over the last number of months, we have really fabulous subject matter specialists and consultants at the collective across a very diverse range of skills and disciplines. You can connect with them at any time direct through our platform. Some of the links have been provided there for you today in the chat box. And we also have a sector first concierge service, which is really a triaging service to help listen to what your needs might be and then tell you about some of the specialists and some of the solutions that are available in the collective. We have about 50 independent operators in the collective, so really diverse range of people and skills for you to connect with whenever you need it. So I'm going to wrap up now and say a very big thank you, Jodie Wilma, thank you Jane Smith, and thank you Julia Cambridge so very much for all of your preparation for today's session. It has been a really jam-packed hour, and I'm sure everyone's taking away lots of goodies back into their organisation. So thank you ladies again, and thank you to the team behind the scenes here at the Collective helping make these live shows come to life. Thank you so much everybody for your commitment and dedication at this time. We look forward to seeing you again soon for our next show, and have a most beautiful day.